I'm Sharif Abdul Quddus from Dropsite News, dropsitenews.com. I'm joined today with my colleague Murtaza Hussain. President Trump issued a series of shocking statements in his press conference on Tuesday alongside Israeli Prime Minister and international fugitive Benjamin Netanyahu, who traveled to DC for a state visit. Trump suggested that the U.S., quote, take over Gaza and that the U.S. would, quote, own the territory. And he again advocated for the forcible transfer of around 2 million Palestinians from Gaza to neighboring countries. Trump said this despite hundreds of thousands of Palestinians returning to the north after being forcibly displaced multiple times. The destruction in the north appears to be total, with people erecting tents on the rubble of their homes in an uncertain future, but certainly a resounding display of Palestinians reclaiming parts of Gaza that they were forced out of by Israel's genocidal assault. As it stands now, phase one of the ceasefire in Gaza is still holding. Israel has, for the most part, stopped its attacks on Gaza. I say for the most part because we have seen dozens of people who have been killed in Israeli attacks since January 19th, when the ceasefire went into effect. The official death toll by the Ministry of Health also continues to rise every day for two other reasons: bodies that are retrieved from under the rubble and people dying of their wounds. The Ministry of Health puts the number of confirmed dead at over 47,000, though that's widely believed to be a very conservative estimate, a vast undercount. It's just the number of bodies brought to hospitals in Gaza and recorded by the health ministry. The number of wounded is over 111,000, the confirmed number, and people in Gaza continue to die from those wounds every day. The healthcare system in Gaza came under severe and systematic attack by the Israeli military, with nearly all of Gaza's hospitals completely destroyed or barely functioning. The World Health Organization says that an estimated 14,000 Palestinians need to be medically evacuated to receive treatment outside of Gaza, including 2,500 children who are at imminent risk of death. So as we look at Gaza and the toll it's taken on Palestinians, we are honored to be joined by two doctors who have traveled to Gaza several times over the past few months on medical missions to provide emergency healthcare. Dr. Mimi Sayad is an emergency medical physician based in Olympia, Washington. She's completed two medical missions to Gaza. The last one was on December 31st. And Dr. Feroz Sidwa is a general trauma and critical care surgeon based in California. He's provided medical care in conflict zones worldwide, including Palestine, Ukraine, Haiti, and Zimbabwe. He was last in Gaza in April and is headed back there in early March. Both Dr. Sayad and Dr. Sidwa are part of a group of doctors who held meetings last week with the UN Secretary General. They also briefed Senate offices in DC, though no senators or senior staff attended the presentations, which we want to talk about as well. So we welcome you both to Dropsite. Thank you for being with us. A question for both of you. What are some of the main points that you wanted to raise with the UN Secretary General last week? And how would you characterize the situation in Gaza as you now understand it? Let's begin with Dr. Mimi Sayad.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I mean, we had several talking points with the Secretary General, one of them being medical evacuations, the need for a centralized process, and the right to return was also a big item on the agenda. We spoke about UNRWA as well. It was just at the time that aid was we were in DC when that happened, and the need for it. I mean, UNRWA is essentially the backbone of Palestine, and withdrawing that is going to be devastating and has already proven to be devastating. So those are some of the talking points. Additionally, I think something, because ceasefire has been announced, we've all kind of lost track of accountability for the atrocious acts that have been committed against the people of Gaza. And so we discussed all of those things.
And Dr. Feroz?
Yeah, no, I was in the same meeting with Mr. Gutierrez and Tom Fletcher, the Undersecretary General for OCHA, and some other folks, and it was they were very receptive. just to make just so nobody accuses us of exaggerating things, there were a few senior staff members that we met with in Congress, like a few random chiefs of staff and things like that. No, but you're correct. No actual Congress people or senators. Even though more than once they walked out of their office while we were having the meeting with their staff. But one weird thing is that we actually found the UN to be more democratic and open than our own Congress in that way. It was very odd. I mean, I have, as far as I can tell, no business meeting with the Secretary General of the United Nations. When I tell people I did that, they're like, "You must be mistaken. For us, that couldn't possibly have happened." So, it's kind of a bizarre thing.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Said and Dr. Sidwa for joining us, and thanks, Sharif, for the introduction. One thing that myself and others had noted recently, or last 24 hours, in President Trump's statement about potentially evacuating or ethnic cleansing Gaza and moving the population somewhere else in the process of precisely annexing it, he mentioned that they may potentially want to seek to evacuate 1.7 to 1.8 million Palestinians from Gaza out of the territory, which he described as the total amount. And Sharif mentioned that the official death toll, as recorded by the Ministry of Health in Gaza, is around 40,000. But in other conflict zones, we've seen that excess deaths or deaths caused not directly by trauma but by other causes usually are many multiples times the number of people killed by direct trauma. And still, we don't know how many people are under the rubble or haven't been found their bodies and so forth. One thing that I have heard talking to doctors in Gaza is that the level of epidemic disease and also untreated disease from heart disease and cancer and other things is very, very prevalent in the population. And it leads me to believe that perhaps that President Trump, when he referred to the total population of Gaza as being 1.7, 1.8 million, and not the 2.3 million recorded before the war, he may be speaking from some information as opposed to extemporaneously. I'm just curious, from your perspective, obviously you've done a lot of work with trauma victims in Gaza, which you want to discuss, but what's going on in terms of the health condition of the population, and how may that potentially be causing a greater number of unrecorded excess deaths that we're not seeing in the Ministry of Health statistics at the moment?
Yeah. So I can start. The Ministry of Health. It's important for people to understand what the Ministry of Health actually records. The Ministry of Health makes no attempt to claim or state otherwise that they have recorded every person who has died of violence in Gaza since October 7th. What they tell us is only, and it's specifically, people who are identifiable and who show up at morgues. Identifiable means their Palestinian ID, their name, their birthday, and their family members can be recorded accurately. So these are all like 100%, no questions asked. These people are absolutely, definitely dead. Their names are known, their birthdays are known, etc. The Ministry of Health doesn't pretend to claim that every single human who has been shot dead or blown up in Gaza in the past 16 months showed up to a morgue, and there's almost certainly no way they did. And in fact, probably in October of last year, the Washington Post had a very long article. I forget how many, but 6 or 7 families' stories of deaths that there's just no way that those deaths are counted in the Ministry of Health numbers. People who were simply vaporized by a bomb or just shredded so badly that there wasn't even a way to transport their remains to a hospital. People who were killed and then buried because the travel to the hospital was simply too dangerous, and it didn't make sense to put family members at risk in order to drag a dead body to a morgue so that it could be, so that it could be counted in some cloud somewhere. This is the first issue. The Lancet, which is one of the leading medical journals in the world, is published in London. Just published maybe 2-3 weeks ago now. Just published a study, but it's not really a study. It's just a team of researchers at Nagasaki University, Cambridge University, and I think Yale, just combed through the individual level Ministry of Health data. So the Ministry of Health gave them their entire database, not just the aggregate numbers. And then they looked at social media postings that could be verified in some other way, and a Ministry of Health survey, an online survey that had been done by the Ministry of Health. And they painstakingly collated each and every one of the tens of thousands of records in these databases. And they found that the Ministry of Health is undercounting even publicly reported violent deaths by about 40%. So that's one thing. If you look at another way of looking at just how severe this attack has been, what the death toll probably actually is, Air Wars, it's a British NGO or I guess research firm really that looks into how air power or the use of air power by modern militaries affects civilian populations. They pardon me, sorry, I'm getting over the flu. They have a study that's new up on their website looking at only the first 25 days of the attack on Gaza, so October 7th to October 31st. And they show that in that 25 days, 5,000 something civilians were killed, which is is almost 4 times more than the deadliest month of conflict they've ever recorded anywhere. Beyond that, they recorded that in that 25 days, 1,900 children were killed in Gaza. And they pointed out that not only is that 7 times deadlier than the deadliest month they've ever recorded, it's almost the same number as the deadliest year of conflict for children ever recorded, which was Syria in 2016. So in that entire year in Syria, which has a population 10 times larger than Gaza and was being bombed by the United States, Russia, so the Syrian government, and being attacked by ISIS all at the same time, in that year, 1,923 children were killed. And in 25 days in Gaza, 1,900 children were killed. So what's been done to Gaza is just, it's an unbelievable thing. No one has any clue what the death toll really is in Gaza. Absolutely no idea. It's when we actually, the only way to know is to actually count. Or to do statistical surveys of people and then do the proper stats analysis. But that requires access and it's going to require time. But when we finally have the answer, it's going to be pretty shocking, I'm pretty sure.
I want to ask about the types of injuries that you were seeing in Gaza, especially when we're talking about children. You both wrote about the witnessing children being brought in who had been shot in the head or chest. And multiple doctors seeing this. Can you talk about the extent of this kind of attack and what this tells you about how Israel was attacking civilians?
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally speaking, any physician, healthcare worker that's gone in there has treated all civilians, and mostly over 70% women and children. The types of injuries and the ones you're specifically referring to, gunshots, we've all seen it. And Feroz wrote a great article in the New York Times with a poll of physicians asking that very question. But this specifically, there was a picture that was printed in the article with a small child and a bullet in the head. That's a picture of Mira. She was a 4-year-old child. This was one of many children that I saw just by myself in that month. I can't even account for the other physicians that were there, but I have 18 documented cases of children who came in with bullets, either in the head or the chest or the abdomen. That was a regular occurrence. Women being shot in the head. I remember a day in August when a mass casualty incident came in, and both the trauma bays, so these are like several, maybe like half a dozen beds in each of those trauma bays, all filled with people, young adults and children, with single shots to the head. And we were just waiting for them to die because they're palliative care. There wasn't anything to do for them. So this was so common. We would see this every single day. I was there in August. I saw that. When I went back in December, again, casualties that were majority children and women. And I saw a young boy named Adam Said, who was 8 years old, who came in with a gunshot to the abdomen. And his family reported that he was shot by a sniper. And most of these patients came in from humanitarian zones. That's just the type of gunshot wounds that we would see. But when you talk about the non-military kind of injuries, because of the living conditions, and you asked this, Murtaz, you asked this earlier, the types of patients that we were seeing that were not, non-conflict related. I mean, I'll give you examples of children because that's what we saw. I worked in the pediatric emergency department most of the time in December. And I saw kids that were like 9 months old that kept coming in. A specific boy that came in recurrently for diarrhea every day. He was there in and out for months. Eventually, his diarrhea was so bad because of the contaminated water and the high levels of E. coli that he bled to death. He had organ failure and died actually while I was there. Something so preventable, so unnecessary, but so common in Gaza. This was something we saw on a daily basis. And then skin infections leading to kidney disease and eventually kidney failure. So, when you talk about all of the casualties and the deaths there, yeah, we saw many with military conflict that was related to that, but so many unaccounted for that are, not related to bombs or gunshots, but related to this aggression.
Can you talk a bit about the impact on the Palestinian healthcare sector of the war? Obviously, so many hospitals have been attacked directly by airstrikes and military operations by the IDF. But yet there's still Palestinian doctors and nurses still somehow operating. My presumption is most of them are working in conditions where their homes have been destroyed and it's not clear where they go after work or what happens. But I'm just curious, in both your experience, what conditions are your Palestinian colleagues in the medical healthcare sector experiencing during the war?
No, they're devastated. They're absolutely devastated in multiple ways. And first of all, the same way as everybody else in Gaza, their homes are destroyed. Their family members are dead. They're starving. They're living outside. No dignity, no privacy. It's a very conservative Arab society. People don't give up their dignity and their privacy easily. And even in a crazed environment that Gaza was, even there, people tried to preserve their ability to have privacy, to live a dignified life that at least kept some semblance of the one they had before. And so these healthcare workers were dealing with all of that as well. The vast majority of them were not being paid to come to work because there was just no way to pay them. The Ministry of Health's salaries were mostly paid by the PA in Ramallah, and they were cut off when the attack started. So that most of these people aren't being paid to work. They still have to try and have their own families survive somehow, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that aspect to it. But then on top of that, they're at work every day, just seeing. I mean, it's hard to. It's sometimes hard to convey. Gaza is a population of half children. It's literally half children. The majority of the population is under 18. I think about 40% are under 15, and 15% of people are under the age of 5. There's children everywhere all the time. And Palestinians have, it's for people who haven't, I've spent a fair amount of time in the West Bank and now in Gaza as well. For people who, and I'm not Palestinian, I don't have any ethnic or religious connection to the conflict. So for people who haven't spent time there, it's hard to convey, and I think Mimi will probably back me up on this. It's hard to convey how fanatically dedicated the Palestinians are to their children. It's over the top sometimes. It's kind of extreme, but it's because they're taken from them all the time. This is not, October 7th is not the first time children were killed en masse in Gaza. When UNICEF put out a press release at the beginning of the war saying that Gaza is once again the most deadly place in the world to be a child. Once again, right? There were 2 other times, Cast Lead and Protective Edge. So they're dealing with all of these same things. I'll just give you one example, I guess. The right next to the room that I lived in with 5 other guys, there was an anesthesiologist named Eamon. He and I did several cases on a young girl together, and he spoke English quite well, so I could get to know him. And one day I was walking out of our room and I saw him coming out of his, and I realized there were 3 or 4, I can't remember now, young women in the room with him. And I thought, oh, they must be his daughters. So then when we were coming back from an operation that night, I said, Eamon, are those your daughters in the room with you? And he said, yes, they are. We're walking outside, it's dark, he's smoking, I can picture it in my head. And I realized his wife must be dead. That's the only reason she wouldn't be there. But nevertheless, I didn't want to burden the guy. But I asked him, I said, where's your wife? And he said, oh, my wife and my only son were killed in an airstrike on our home. So when I found that empty room, I moved my daughters into there, and that's where we live now. And so we kept walking, and it was weird because Eamon had been actually one of the only healthcare workers in Gaza who didn't seem burned out, who didn't seem like he didn't want to be there, who didn't who cared when people were in pain or any, he really was still trying to act as much like a normal physician as he could. And so I asked him about, I said, Eamon, you're so enthusiastic about doing everything, but how do you deal with the fact that your wife and child were taken away from you like this? And he stopped, and I just remember he took a drag off of his cigarette, and he said, Feroz, I have my daughters, and I have to show them that life can go on, but really I'm dead inside. I've lost everything, but they're alive, and I have to be strong for them. And that's something you hear throughout the Gaza Strip. I know, not just from physicians, from regular people too, but it's devastating. And this is something this is not like a one-off story. This is rinse and repeat. This is every healthcare worker who isn't already dead, which is 1 out of every 20 at least. It's probably more, who isn't in an Israeli prison, which is about 1 out of every 30 healthcare workers, including most of the most experienced, the longest serving, et cetera. So the real creme de la creme of the Palestinian medical sector, or those who have fled, which in just my own personal estimation is about 1 out of 10, but I can't find any actual data on it. So the healthcare sector, not just the physical plant of it, the hospitals, the pharmaceutical warehouses, not just that, but the human resources built up over literally generations has just been obliterated and maimed. Well, what's left is just so mentally devastated, so spiritually devastated, whatever term you want to use. I mean, the Palestinian physicians are quite good at their job, but and nurses and everybody else, but they have a limit too.
Yeah, and to give you an idea, I mean, coming to the hospital and living in the hospital was a luxury because you were guaranteed 1 meal a day, which is about, I calculate about 400 to 500 calories a day for an adult human. That's nothing for an adult, especially with a difficult task of being a physician there. And then they had access to a bathroom that 100 other people were using, but it was there nonetheless. There was at times running water, there was electricity. In their homes, in their tents, none of that is available. So a lot of them would just come and stay in the hospital and bring their families every once in a while. Like I remember a nurse coming in one time who lived there, and she brought 3 little kids with her one day, and just so she can bathe them, because there was water that day. And so that gives you an idea. And something to point out too, and something that people don't realize is this is not a population that was like in poverty before October 7th. This is people like you and I. They have jobs, they have a house, a car, they have education, and it was taken away from them overnight. Everything was taken away. So just imagine how that feels. If one day you woke up, you didn't have your house, you didn't have your car, and now your degree or whatever it is, you can't use it. So that's really what it comes down to. It's a complete devastation, an instant devastation.
I want to ask about this issue of medical evacuations. We touched on it briefly earlier, that the UN estimates about 14,000 Palestinians need to be evacuated out of Gaza for medical treatment. And part of the ceasefire agreement is that medical evacuations are supposed to begin again through the Rafah crossing. Our understanding is that it has begun, but the numbers are very low of the number of people being allowed out. Can you talk about this staggering figure, if that's what you think is correct, 14,000 medical evacuations needed, and what the future holds for them if they are evacuated? Will they be allowed to return to Gaza?
14,000 is what's people have gotten on a list, and that's the official number. There are thousands and thousands more that need medical care outside of Gaza that will die if they don't receive that care, but they haven't made the list. So that's what the official number you're referring to. 2,500 is the number of children that need urgent evacuation. But again, those are children that have made the list. So, and I'll just say what I know about it, and Feroz, you can speak to it as well. But I think the last time that there were supposed to be 50 patients evacuated through Rafah border, and only 39 were evacuated the last time. Additionally, companions are significantly limited. So I have a case of Mira that I just spoke about. She's a 4-year-old little girl. She's been waiting. She was shot by a sniper in her head. She almost died. She needs ongoing medical care. If she doesn't get it, she will die. Since we've been waiting for her medical evacuation, it's been delayed, and her mom was injured because of an airstrike to their tent and now has an amputation of her leg. So she's a primary caregiver. She has 2 other little girls. So she not only is her mom a patient, she can't take care of Mira, but now both of them need evacuation. And mom doesn't have any guarantee she can come back. She has no guarantee for right of return. She has 2 little kids that she's going to have to most likely stay. They're going to have to stay in Gaza, and the family is completely separated and destroyed. So these are the kind of issues, or if the parents are dead, then the living relative has a child of their own, and they can't leave them behind. So their hands are completely tied. So those are some of the issues that really you don't get to hear about, because you hear, oh, this number of patients got out of Gaza for medical evacuation, but it's extremely limited. And now there's completely brand new rules as of today as well. And Froz, you could probably talk more about that.
Yeah, I actually don't know about the new rules. One thing, when people say the rules, this is one area of extreme difficulty. COGAT, it's I think it stands for Coordinating Office of Government Activity in the Territory, something like that. But it's the Israeli office that coordinates between the Israeli military and government and the external humanitarian sector, like the WHO or random NGOs or the UN in general. And COGAT actually, if you can believe this, does not provide anything in writing to anybody. So the WHO, for example, is just told this person can't go, this person can go, this person's approved, this person's not approved. And it's, you can imagine how difficult it is to evacuate tens of thousands of people under just verbal rules that change on a daily basis, completely on a whim. They seem to be completely arbitrary. We were just at the UN, like you mentioned, and we gave a press conference there where Dr. Aisha Khan relayed a story about these 2 little girls. The older one is maybe 6 years old, and she's missing both of her legs. And the younger one is, I think, 2, and she's missing part of her foot, both from an explosion. That explosion killed their parents. And both of these kids need ongoing medical care. Their stump sites meaning the amputation sites, keep getting infected. They're both sharing one wheelchair. Like they're not going to survive if they're not evacuated, if their medical and surgical problems aren't dealt with, and if they can't go back to a place where they at least have some sort of support available to them. Well, their caregiver is their aunt. And the children, the doctors, everybody, the Ministry of Health, they all went through the evacuation process, and all of them were approved to leave Gaza. But the aunt has a breastfeeding infant of her own, a breastfeeding infant that the Israelis refused to allow to leave. What does this have to do with security? This is complete. Why is anyone even asking Israel if a breastfeeding infant can get on a truck and leave through the Rafah crossing? What possible interest could the Israeli government or military have in that question? Well, only if it's to deliver cruelty for cruelty's sake. I mean, there's no other explanation for that. So these issues are very, very. We use the term challenging in medicine, but I think we use it incorrectly. It's being made impossible. Since the ceasefire, I was just reading the latest UNOCHA update for the territories. Since the ceasefire, it seems that about 100 people have been evacuated, have undergone medical evacuations through Rafah. The ceasefire agreement, or at least the annex to the agreement that was signed on January 19th, or that went into effect on January 19th, is it states that 50 injured combatants are supposed to leave the Gaza Strip every day through Rafah for medical care, and that all civilians who are injured or just need any type of medical evacuation are supposed to be allowed through the Rafah crossing. But again, this is always with the caveat of security, and security is infinitely fungible. Even a breastfeeding infant can qualify. So until that kind of thing is actually dealt with, and the only people that could make the Israelis actually come up with a sensible evacuation scheme would be the United States. Several Israeli NGOs, I think it was Geisha and Physicians for Human Rights Israel, and maybe another one, I just can't remember now. They've been suing the Israelis, the Israeli government at the Israeli Supreme Court since May of last year, simply stating that the Israeli government must create some written plan for medical evacuations from Gaza, just some written protocol. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the Israeli government has now received its 19th stay on that lawsuit, meaning the 19th time they've come to court and said, sorry, we just haven't gotten time enough to respond to this since May of last year. It's completely outrageous, I mean, again, this is a major problem, and we as physicians, we try to work through this system because we know it'll help individual people, but with this kind of deliberately imposed inefficiency, there's simply no way that the tens of thousands of people who need to be medically evacuated to prevent them either from dying or suffering just totally avoidable and grievous disability is going to be shocking. And Gaza is already one of the most wounded and one of the most crippled populations in the world, and it even was before October 7th. So you're really talking about generations and generations now of trauma that's going to be long lasting and quite severe.
Yeah, Dr. Sayed and Dr. Sidwa, you both are kind of part of a very small, unique cohort of people who've actually been able to enter Gaza since the start of the war, because one of the aspects of the Israeli government's prosecution of the war has been to prohibit access to most of the world's civil society and journalists. And whatever glimpses we have what's going on in Gaza mostly comes from Palestinian journalists based there or people on social media. I was just curious, from what you saw, can you describe exactly how the surviving Palestinian population is living today, in the sense of what sort of material conditions are they living in? What access or lack of access do they have to basic necessities of life? How does the day-to-day life look for the 1.7 million or however many Palestinians surviving in the camp at the moment?
I mean, it's completely destroyed, right? The ceasefire is, we're going to stop dropping bombs, hopefully stop shooting people, but that population is completely destroyed. So if you can imagine, there's no way to get from A to B. The roads are completely broken up. They bulldoze the roads. There's no way for ambulances to get from A to B. Sometimes, trucks can't even bring in aid on a certain road because there's no way to get through it. It's not safe. The water system is completely destroyed. So there's no way to have clean water. They're still, to my knowledge, preventing the filtration system or the cleaning agents needed to have clean water, like chlorine and things like that. The electricity grid that was once there is completely destroyed. So, you're talking about like decades of repair that's going to be needed in order to bring that back to the way it was before October 7th. But day-to-day life is still terrible. Like the people that moved back to the north, that migrated back, they went back to rubble. One of my friends, Shruk, is a very famous journalist there, and she sent me a video of her apartment or a condominium that she left behind. She lost her husband, who was also a journalist, and they had buried him in the north. The grave is gone. That's destroyed. So she couldn't even find where she buried him. So everything is just completely down to rubble and powder. I mean, there's nothing left. So their conditions, while they don't have the same number of airstrikes that they did once before, they have nothing to go back to.
Yeah, the whole place has been obliterated. I mean, it's true that it's worst in the north. The north, and people can. There's plenty of drone footage. There's plenty of other things. You can. It looks like the north got hit by a series of nuclear weapons. I mean, it's a shocking thing to see. It's really it's otherworldly. When I was in Khan Yunis, again, this was probably April 4th or 5th that this happened. So this was April 4th or 5th of last year. The destruction of Khan Yunis was still going on, but I got the chance to drive south to Rafah and then west to the Mawasi and then back north and through Khan Yunis. And there was one point when we were driving through, and I was looking out the windows, and I was like, "Are we sure this used to be a city?" So I just told the driver to stop for a second, and just got out and looked, and I was in the middle of Khan Yunis, and I could see the Mediterranean Sea. And if anybody wants to see how crazy that is, just look at a map. There were no buildings between me and the sea that were more than like 3 feet tall anymore. It was insane. And I remember thinking if I grew up in whatever building that thing used to be, I probably wouldn't even recognize where I was. Like I don't think I would know if this was my childhood home. It was wild. It was just totally wild. It's hard to convey the extent of destruction to people who haven't seen it. It's really, really shocking. And then that same OCHA update estimated that 500,000 something people have gone north through the Netzarim corridor to Gaza City and North Gaza. But just like Mimi said, they're going back to absolutely nothing. I mean, they're going back because they're steadfast and they insist on going back, which good for them. But it is not clear at all how they're going to survive there. The ceasefire agreement stipulates that there are, I'm pretty sure I think I'm remembering correctly, 600 trucks are to be allowed in every day, 50 of which have to include fuel. And I believe 300 of which are designated for northern Gaza. But it's extremely difficult to access northern Gaza right now. Thankfully, the Israelis have opened the northern checkpoints between Israel and Gaza. So, or at least two of them, as far as I understand. So there is aid that can at least be brought over the border, but how it's going to be distributed in a land that, like Mimi said, has no roads, a critical lack of fuel shortage, and everyone's just terrified to do anything. It's not at all clear. The FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization, pointed out just yesterday or the day before that it's going to take decades just to reestablish any agricultural capacity at all in Gaza, because all of the agricultural land has just been destroyed. Actually, for the second, if maybe third time, if anybody wants to see the satellite photos, Israeli bulldozers have carved huge stars of David into the agricultural fields of the Gaza Strip. They did this after Operation Cast Lead, and I believe they did it after Operation Protective Edge again. And they did it again this time as they withdrew. Running treaded vehicles over and over and over on soil, on topsoil destroys it, and that's of course the whole point of doing that. So Gaza's agricultural sector has been obliterated for about the third time in 2 decades. So even growing simple things is not going to be possible there for, like the FAO said, for years, if not decades. The UN Conference on Trade and Development, I think, estimated that it would take 350 years to rebuild Gaza if the blockade is maintained. The UN Environmental Program estimates that it'll take 15 years just to clear the rubble from Gaza. I believe it's 50 million tons of rubble were estimated to be in Gaza, all chocked full of human remains, unexploded ordnance, God knows what else. So the conditions people are living in are just a total disaster. The environment itself is completely wrecked. I mean, when I was in Gaza, it was hard to breathe. Like literally just walking around. Maybe I don't know if you had the same experience, but it's actually challenging to just breathe the air. You can feel it. It's really quite aggressive. And nobody has any idea what heavy metals are floating around, what bomb residue, what resins are in the air, what this much concrete dust does to people when they're breathing it in. We learned bad lessons about these kinds of things after the first Gulf War with the depleted uranium issues and things like that. It's a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, and the air quality, that's what for, as you were just mentioning, it's absolutely true. I mean, we saw women coming in with breathing issues that were pregnant, and they would have preterm labor because there wasn't enough oxygen in their blood, and you could feel it. If you could feel it going in, just like Feroz said. But these are women that were living there the entire time, and now they're coming in with premature labor, and their children, of course, are going to have debilitating long-term illness like cerebral palsy. That's a lifetime disease, right? That can sometimes even be fatal. So this is a direct attack on like the birth rate and the whole process of of having children and reproducing. I think there was a quote from UNICEF, I believe, like 300% chance of miscarriage during this last year for women. Which is astounding. I don't think any place is like that. So that gives you just an idea of the conditions, but the environmental disaster that is now that we're looking at.
As we're listening and hearing what Gaza is like, I actually want to follow up on something Maz was just saying about accessing Gaza. And Israel, along with Egypt, has not allowed international journalists into Gaza since October 7th, 2023. And this has meant that the burden of covering the war has fallen almost entirely on the shoulders of Palestinian journalists who have done a heroic job covering this genocidal assault and letting the world know what is happening. And as we heard also, they've suffered tremendously for it. Over 200 of them have been killed, which is an unprecedented scale of killing of journalists. And those who have survived have lost so much. They've lost their homes and their families and their friends. But doctors and humanitarian workers are some of the only people who have been allowed in from abroad. And doctors like yourselves, who in addition to doing this crucial work of providing medical care, have also been crucial witnesses and providing testimony of what's happening in Gaza. So can you talk about this role of doctors as witnesses and what this has meant for you?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There is no independent journalists that are allowed from outside, and so that responsibility has essentially fallen upon us, whether we like it or not. I think all of us, most of us, Feroz probably has a better idea, but have been involved in media and have been speaking up about it. I think it kind of behooves us to do so, just given our role as physicians and our obligation to protect humanity. We have to share what we saw. What we saw was a violation of human rights. We saw carnage. All of us saw it. And so it basically falls upon us. But, and we don't have any ties. I don't have any ties to Palestine. I don't have any ties to anything or Israel or anything of the sort. My obligations are strictly to humanity. And not to mention like the children. So, not as a physician, but as a mother, I'm a mother of 3 small children. I'm compelled to go and show up and then witness and also speak about it. There's nothing that is going to keep me silent. And I think all of us feel the same. We've brought back, documentation. We've seen what the destruction is like, the different levels of destruction. I looked very closely at the water contamination there. And because we owe it to the people of Gaza, we owe it to the world to show what's going on there.
Yeah, I think it's not unusual at all for humanitarian workers, for physicians, etc., nurses, healthcare workers in general, who go into conflict and disaster zones to tell people what they saw when they were there. There's nothing unusual about that. The unusual thing here is that, like somebody said, that there are no journalists in Gaza who have easy access to the Western media. At least there's plenty of Palestinian journalists, like you said, despite the real slaughter of them, and they really bravely continue to do the work that they're trained to do. But as we all know, they don't really get prominent showing in major papers, and they're certainly not listened to by American intelligence sources and things like that. So it's not they don't end up having much of an influence over public perception of the conflict, and at least not in the United States. Certainly in the Arab world they do, but not here. But the when we came back, when you're in Gaza, you realize you're witnessing something that is it's not a normal war. There's something else going on there. I've worked in Ukraine 3 times since the Russian invasion, and the Russian invasion is extremely brutal. But I didn't get the sense that the Russians were about to kill me whenever they wanted to. That's not the situation. Despite not having that concern, Ukraine under Russian invasion was the worst country in the world for attacks on healthcare before Gaza. In Gaza, the rate of attacks on healthcare is 30 times higher than it is in Ukraine. And that's leaving aside that in Ukraine, the WHO considers a verbal threat against a hospital to be an attack on healthcare. In Gaza, if you were to do that, there would have been 50 trillion attacks on healthcare since October 7th. So it wouldn't make the numbers look good. So there's not when physicians come back, and not just physicians, nurses, whoever else that goes, and even the humanitarian workers that go, Tom Fletcher has spoken out when he's come back. Mr. Fletcher said, he's the head of the Organization for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs at the UN. He's the Undersecretary General for it. He said, and he was correct, that in his what he saw when he was in Gaza, this is when he had gone previously, was that there's a perception in Gaza that it is dangerous to protect aid convoys and safe to loot them. Well, okay, yeah, that's we can all see that. That seems perfectly accurate. There's nothing like dastardly about him pointing this out to the world. That's just normal human behavior. So when people say, "Oh, you're going and you're acting like journalists, or you're acting like propagandists, or this or that," it's like I don't really, and not that you guys were implying it, but I don't really see it that way. I see it as as just a perfectly normal human thing to do, to say and tell people what you saw when you were there.
I had one more question, and then I'll give it to Sharif to maybe wrap it up. And thank you both for your time and for sharing your observations. Dr. Sayed, you mentioned something specifically about children and the impact of the war on children in Gaza. There's been some reporting that estimates that there's a very large number of orphans created by the war in Gaza, and unaccompanied minors in hospitals and things like this and so forth. Can you share a bit specifically about what you've seen in that regard and how children have been affected most acutely by the war, given, as Dr. Sidwa said as well, too, that the majority of the pre-war population did consist of people who are under 18?
I would just add very quickly that the health ministry just said a couple of weeks ago that they estimate the number of orphan children at nearly 40,000.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think it's probably higher, but we routinely saw children walking unaccompanied. I think I did a little piece for DropSite before, but on orphans that we had seen around the hospital. I mean, very small children, right? We're not talking about even 5 years old, but we're talking about 2-year-old, 3-year-olds walking around. And most of the children there, if not all of them, are walking around with this empty canister to fill water up. To wherever they can find water, they'll try to fill it up. That's just common. You'd see that everywhere. But the Secretary General said this really well. Secretary General Guterres, that Gaza is a graveyard for children. It is absolutely true. But not only that, the surviving children are orphans. So a lot of them, when I was there in August, I spoke to so many children that were actually from the north, and they were hanging around the hospital like corridors and things like that, because that's where the safest place to be. I say in air quotes, the safest place to be. So you would see a bunch of kids unaccompanied by adults walking around the hospital, and I got to know some of them. And there was an 8-year-old there that I asked him, what are you doing here? He said, "Oh, my parents were killed in the north, and I just kind of moved. I moved here, and that's where I am now." I'm like, "Well, do you have family here?" "No, I don't have any family here." So that's so common. That's just one kid, but there were dozens, around that hospital. But then, I can't even imagine the number. I don't know how you would possibly know how many kids there are, but that's a very common thing to see there. Children just walking around. I remember seeing a 2-year-old walking around with a black eye. I think I submitted that picture once to DropSite, but that it was, I just saw that by myself at that particular hospital in that month, but all of my colleagues have witnessed the same. So that's a natural aftermath. That's what's going to happen when you have an attack on civilians.
Yeah. So somebody earlier said, what does the shooting of children in the head indicate about what the Israeli attack is? I shouldn't say the Israeli attack, the U.S. Israeli attack on Gaza. And I think it's not just that particular, but like lots of different things. So and I'm sure your listeners have probably heard this before, but a new acronym had to be created in Gaza. It's WCNSF, Wounded Child No Surviving Family. That's not a common phenomenon that you have to create an acronym for in other conflict zones. So there are plenty of children that they're not just orphans, they literally have no extended family. All their brothers and sisters are dead. All their aunts and uncles are dead. Like it's incredible. Now the Palestinians are remarkably, there's a very unusual amount of social cohesion in this society. And so you see that if your parents are dead and your siblings are dead, the uncles take care of you. If the uncles and aunts are dead, some neighbor takes care of you. If your neighbor's dead, your neighbor's cousin will take care of you. Like there are, these children do end up with people that they have at least some tenuous connection to. They may never have met them, but they at least have some tenuous connection to them. But that takes time. And right now, these children there are plenty of unaccompanied children. Actually, in that OCHA update I mentioned, one of the things that was observed regularly was unaccompanied children walking north through the Netzarim corridor, because they know they live up there somewhere, but they'd have no idea what they're actually going to find, and they're not going with anybody. So so humanitarian groups have started putting bracelets on unaccompanied children to identify. This is very unusual to have to do, even after massive displacement of a population. So there's the orphaning and things like that, but there's also what's being done to the general population of children who aren't dead, aren't injured. There have been no school supplies allowed into Gaza for the past year, or since October 7th. Well, in a normal ceasefire agreement, you don't specify the number of aid trucks that are allowed to go into a territory, right? Like the treaty between the U.S. and Germany doesn't specify that Germans can only eat this much, or can only buy this many books, or can only build this many buildings. Like, that's not a thing. It's only in this context that that's allowed. That itself is a war on the society, and this is a society that, like I said, is half kids. Well, what is exactly the purpose of blocking children's textbooks from coming into Gaza? What's the purpose of blocking paper? Well, just because there are other more urgent needs, to be sure, to keep people alive, but you could very easily just make an exception, say, oh, okay, yeah, 600 trucks of real aid, but we'll also let in books so kids can read and have a distraction. But no one's interested in that. This has been a war on children, and it has, exactly like Gutierrez said, it has created a graveyard for children that's just unlike anything else on earth. It's just, again, going back to Ukraine used to be the worst country in the world for attacks on children, military attacks on children. In the first year of the Russian invasion, February of 2022, going forward, in that year, if I remember the number right, it's approximately right, but if I remember it exactly, it was 732 children were killed in Ukraine. Well, Ukraine is a country twice the size of Texas with 39 million people in it, right? Gaza is a country of a territory of 2.2 million, or it used to be of 2.2 million people, the size of metropolitan Philadelphia. So in Gaza, something like 14 or 15,000 children were killed in 1 year, let alone the 16-month toll. In Ukraine, 732 children were killed. If you adjust that for the size of the population, the rate of killing of kids in Gaza is hundreds and hundreds of times higher than it is in Ukraine. So this is these children have lost their siblings, their friends, their mothers, their fathers, their uncles, their aunts, their homes, their schools, their education. They've lost their whole childhood. And they've also been, it's important to remember, they've been starved for a year. Children will not recover completely from that. No child will. You will not recover their mental capacities, their intellectual capacities. This has been a war. I don't think it's inaccurate at all to say this has been a war on children, and it's had its expected effects.
I think one of the things to mention is about children is I have never in my career seen children as young as 5 years old saying, I want to die. I saw that regularly in Gaza. Children want to be dead because they think that that's a better deal than living what they're living in, the conditions that they're living in, or having to be maimed, which they see other kids. That's happening to them all the time, all around them. They have death all around them, and it's just not a normal thing. It's not something you see in any other place. I mean, so it's direct hit on children.
Yeah. And who do children look to for comfort? It's their mothers. Their mothers are also not, like in the case of, what's the little girl, Mira, her mother is physically maimed, but I mean, there's a woman who runs a charity for children, I think in the Middle East, but maybe in general, for children in conflict. Her name's Arwa Damon. And she told CNN, she used to be a journalist at CNN, and she told a CNN colleague a story about a woman who said that her young son, maybe 4 or 5 years old, was having bedwetting problems and wasn't listening to her, was acting improperly and traumatized since he saw his sister's head blown off in front of him. And Arwa continued speaking to this mother, and she eventually realized that this mother had also been there when that had happened. So she herself had seen her child's head ripped off of her by a bullet or a bomb. I don't know what it was. And they kept talking, and eventually this woman realized Arwa was trying to get towards asking her about well, you were there too. And this woman said, I know what you're going to, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember the exact words, but she said, I know what you're going to ask me, but please don't, because I have a child who is still alive, and I need to be strong for him. This is you're talking about the infliction of multi-generational trauma on a really grand scale, and it's going to have consequences. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I want to thank you both very much for being with us, Dr. Feroz Sidwa and Dr. Mimi Sayed, and thank you for all the work that you do. And thank you to everyone who tuned in, to our viewers and listeners. And if you appreciate Dropsite and the kind of work that we do, we rely on our audience, on our readers and viewers and listeners for support. You can go to dropsite.com to see how to make a one-time donation or become a paid subscriber. I'm Sharif Abdul Quddus with Murtaza Hussain. Thank you for joining us.